Hereby, I open this academic ceremony in which Brenda Ahrens will defend the academic thesis Child Investigative Interviewing and Risk Assessment in Dutch Child Abuse Investigations Towards Evidence-Based Practice. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis?
Geachte prorector, geachte leden van de corona en lieve collega's, familie en vrienden. Welkom bij de verdediging van mijn proefschrift Child Investigative Interviewing and Risk Assessment in Dutch Child Abuse Investigation. De afgelopen jaren heb ik een aantal problemen binnen de aanpak van kindermishandeling onderzocht bij Veilig Thuis. Het hoofddoel was daarbij om te onderzoeken in hoeverre de huidige aanpak van kindermishandeling aansluit bij hetgeen wat we weten vanuit de wetenschap, specifiek het gebruik van evidence-based methodes. Daarbij wilden we kijken in hoeverre er verbetering mogelijk was wat het gebruik van deze methodes en ook op het gebied van samenwerking tussen organisaties die deze kinderen horen te beschermen in Nederland.
Attentie. Graag wat dichter bij de microfoon staan, alsjeblieft. Of die buigen naar uw mond toe. Ja, dank u wel voor de verstaanbaarheid.
Oké. Dit heeft geleid tot een aantal onderzoeken die ik beschreven heb over deze verschillende hoofdstukken. En vanwege de beperkte tijd zal ik me van vandaag focussen op hoofdstuk 1 tot en met 3. En dit wil ik graag doen door jullie mee te nemen in de casus van Lisa, die de dagelijkse praktijk zal illustreren. Lisa is namelijk een meisje van 4 jaar oud en komt op een dag thuis met een aantal verontrustende feiten. Zij vertelt namelijk tegen haar moeder dat ze een geheimpje heeft met haar vader. En ze is hier erg verdrietig over en ze vertelt dat ze een aantal dingen moet doen als ze met papa alleen is die ze totaal niet fijn vindt. Waaronder dat hij haar aanraakt op haar benen, tussen haar billen. En Lisa's moeder schrikt hier uiteindelijk heel erg van en zij gaat naar Veilig Thuis, het advies- en meldpunt kindermishandeling. Deze besluit hierop een onderzoek te starten naar mogelijke kindermishandeling. En dit doen ze door in eerste instantie te praten met de vader van Lisa, die alle aantijgingen ontkent en hij zegt dat er geen sprake is van kindermishandeling. En ja, ze gaan vervolgens verder met het onderzoek en Veilig Thuis benadert een aantal informanten. En zij schakelen ook de politie in, omdat er mogelijk strafbare kindermishandeling aan de hand is. Nou, de politie geeft in eerste instantie aan dat er sprake is van vage signalen van misbruik en dat zij daarom niet met het kind zullen spreken. Veilig Thuis gaat hierop verder met het onderzoek en Lisa doet steeds meer onthullingen. Zij geeft aan dat zij vaak een snoepje krijgt van papa nadat het misbruik voorbij is. En hierop praat Veilig Thuis opnieuw met de politie en zij geven vervolgens aan dat zij een studioverhoor zullen plannen. Dit studioverhoor plannen duurt echter meer dan 2 weken, waardoor Lisa enorm lang moet wachten op een gesprek. Veilig Thuis merkt daarbij dat er ruzie is tussen ouders en dat de thuissituatie steeds grimmiger wordt. En ze willen hierop graag hulpverlening inzetten. Maar vervolgens is dit niet mogelijk omdat het strafrechtelijk onderzoek nog steeds loopt. En hierdoor blijft Lisa in een onveilige situatie zitten die natuurlijk ontzettend naar is voor haar en ook voor het gezin. Seksueel misbruik is natuurlijk maar één vorm van mogelijke kindermishandeling. En kindermishandeling is een veel omvangrijker probleem. In Nederland is de prevalentie tussen de 3 en de 12%, afhankelijk van onderzoeken die gericht zijn op self-reports of op professionals. En het bestaat in veel verschillende vormen, zoals fysieke mishandeling, seksueel misbruik, maar ook het getuige zijn van huiselijk geweld is een vorm van kindermishandeling. En dit kunnen ernstige gevolgen hebben voor de lange en de korte termijn, waaronder latere diabetes, hart- en vaatziektes, angstproblemen, depressie, maar ook het is zelfs in verband gebracht met een vroegtijdige dood. Dit alles brengt hoge maatschappelijke kosten met zich mee voor onze maatschappij. Kinderbescherming in Nederland is helaas complex en versnipperd geregeld. Aan de ene kant is er Veilig Thuis, het advies- en meldpunt kindermishandeling, die een aantal wettelijke taken heeft, waaronder het advies geven in mogelijke gevallen van kindermishandeling, maar ook het onderzoek nemen. En Veilig Thuis doet dit niet alleen. Zij proberen het zicht op veiligheid te creëren en dat doen ze met een aantal ketenpartners, waaronder het Lokale Veld. En het Lokale Veld is eigenlijk een verzamelnaam van organisaties die in onze gemeentes werkzaam zijn, zoals de GGD, de GGD, de school, de huisartsen. En hiernaast werkt Veilig Thuis natuurlijk nauw samen met de politie in geval van vermoedelijke strafbare kindermishandeling. En in het geval dat dat leidt tot een zaak, dan komt het Openbaar Ministerie daar ook bij kijken. Nou, Veilig Thuis formuleert voornamelijk ook advies voor mogelijke hulpverlening. En in het geval dit niet toereikend is, dan schakelen zij de Raad voor de Kinderbescherming in, die vervolgens binnen een kader opereren waarin zij een maatregel aanvragen via de kinderrechter. Dit noemt men het gedwongen kader. En deze maatregelen die worden uitgevoerd door professionals binnen jeugdzorg, Bureau Jeugdzorg Nederland. Nou, deze organisatie brengt een aantal problemen met zich mee. Aangezien dit zo versnipperd geregeld is, leidt het tot een inefficiënte manier van werken en ook een duplicatie van taken. Omdat verschillende professionals van verschillende organisaties zo bezig zijn met hetzelfde kind, met hetzelfde gezin. Ja, en vaak ook nog binnen dezelfde periode van tijd. Bovendien is het niet kindgericht, want het kind staat niet centraal in dit hele verhaal, maar moet zich als het ware door de verschillende organisaties heen bewegen. Nou, dit eerste probleem bracht ons eigenlijk tot de volgende vraagstelling, namelijk hebben professionals bij Veilig Thuis dan wel voldoende kennis over het geheugen van kinderen, over kindinterviews en gebruiken zij wetenschappelijk gefundeerde methodes om met kinderen te praten in een onderzoek naar kindermishandeling. En deze eerste vraag hebben wij onderzocht middels een online studie bij Veilig Thuis, waarbij wij professionals een aantal stellingen voorlegden over het geheugen van kinderen, maar ook over kindinterviews. En we hebben dit vergeleken met de wetenschap en gekeken in hoeverre zij die kennis hadden die ze nodig hebben op dit gebied. En wat we eigenlijk vonden is dat professionals op een aantal stellingen correcte antwoorden gaven, maar op een aantal stellingen totaal niet. En dat dit dus niet overeenkomt met wat we weten vanuit de wetenschap. Zo blijken professionals onvoldoende kennis te hebben over kindinterviews. Daarbij is er nog een verschil tussen gedragswetenschappers, artsen en maatschappelijk werkers, waarbij we zagen dat gedragswetenschappers en artsen gemiddeld gezien wat hoger scoorden. Op een aantal stellingen scoorden zij wel goed, bijvoorbeeld op het gebied van valse herinneringen. Dat zijn herinneringen die eigenlijk niet echt gebeurd zijn, maar waar je wel een herinnering over hebt. Nou, bovendien vonden wij dat er veelvuldig nog gebruik wordt gemaakt over wat betreft methodes zonder empirische basis. Dat er daar geen consensus in was, dus er was geen standaardisatie in het gebruik van deze methodes. En ze gebruiken nog tools tijdens de kindinterviews, zoals anatomische poppen en tekeningen, waarvan we weten dat zij geheugenfouten kunnen veroorzaken en suggestief kunnen werken. Nou, deze eerste studie bracht ons tot het volgende onderzoek, namelijk verbetert de implementatie van een wetenschappelijk onderbouwd interviewprotocol dan de kwaliteit van deze interviews bij Veilig Thuis. En dit hebben we gedaan door het NICAD, het National Institute of Child Health and Development Protocol, te implementeren bij Veilig Thuis Zuid-Limburg. En waarom dit protocol? Nou, van alle onderzochte protocollen heeft deze de beste wetenschappelijke basis, omdat het onderzocht is in veel verschillende landen, bij verschillende doelgroepen en in verschillende settings. En het is bovendien een protocol dat aan de ene kant gestructureerd is volgens verschillende fases, maar ook flexibel inzetbaar voor de verschillende soorten casuïstiek van Veilig Thuis, maar ook houdt het rekening met de cognitieve ontwikkeling van het kind. En we hebben daarbij 2 condities gecreëerd bij Veilig Thuis, namelijk een conditie waar we professionals hebben getraind in het protocol, 3 dagen lang. En dit werd opgevolgd door feedbackmomenten. En dit hebben we vergeleken met de controleconditie. En hierin deden professionals eigenlijk wat ze normaliter deden. Dit was vaak de 3 huizen-methode, waarin professionals dus tekenden met 3 huizen met het kind. En we hebben een aantal uitkomstmaten bekeken, namelijk het type vraag. Welke vragen stellen deze interviewers nu tijdens deze condities, tijdens deze 2 soorten interviews? En dan heb je een onderscheid in invitaties. Dit zijn open vragen, vertel me eens vragen. Gesloten vragen, daarin heb je optiegeven vragen. Daarbij moet het kind eigenlijk kiezen uit 2 opties, namelijk op of onder, of ja of nee, dat is ook een gesloten vraag. Of directieve vragen. Dit zijn vragen zoals wie, wat, waar, waarom. En daarnaast heb je nog suggestieve vragen. Hierbij introduceert de interviewer informatie die het kind niet eerder gegeven heeft tijdens het interview. Daarnaast keken we naar de hoeveelheid en de soort informatie die het kind gaf. En hoe relevant dit was voor het onderzoek van Veilig Thuis. Vervolgens keken we naar de gemoedstoestand van het kind. Hoe voelde het kind zich voor en na het interview? En keken we naar of het kind vatbaar was voor suggestieve informatie. En dit deden we door een aantal suggestieve vragen te stellen na ieder interview. Nou, de resultaten van dit project waren positief. We zagen wat betreft het aantal vragen dat in de NICAD-condities gemiddeld gezien professionals meer open vragen stelden, dus meer de gewenste vragen. En gezegd moet worden dat vanuit het NICAD-protocol ook het idee is dat je zoveel mogelijk open vragen stelt. En pas als al die open vragen zijn uitgeput, dat je pas overgaat naar de gesloten vragen. Ze stelden bovendien veel minder suggestieve vragen in de NICAD-conditie vergeleken met de controleconditie. En je ziet wat betreft de gesloten vragen, dus de optiegeven en de directieve vragen, dat er geen significant verschil was, dat die toch ongeveer hetzelfde waren. En dit is wel iets wat eigenlijk ook gewenst is in het NICAD-protocol, dat je ook deze vragen zo min mogelijk stelt. Wat betreft het aantal woorden van het kind, zag je dat in de NICAD-conditie kinderen veel meer vertelden, maar belangrijker dat zij ook veel meer relevante informatie gaven over het onderzoek bij Veilig Thuis. Dus ja, dat het meer informatie gaf voor het onderzoek naar kindermishandeling. Wat betreft de gemoedstoestand zagen we eigenlijk in beide condities dat kinderen relaxter waren na het interview. En dit is ook een hele mooie bevinding, aangezien we vaak denken dat deze interviews heel erg stressvol zijn voor kinderen. En als laatste vonden we ook nog dat in de NICAD-conditie kinderen minder geneigd waren om mee te gaan met de suggestieve informatie die we hen achteraf gaven. Nou, vanuit deze pilot kunnen we een aantal conclusies trekken, waarvan de belangrijkste is dat de implementatie van het NICAD-protocol de kwaliteit van deze forensische interviews verbetert. Dat training professionals ook meer kennis en vertrouwen geeft. Dit hebben we ook onderzocht door hen dit te vragen van hoe hebben jullie de training ervaren, hoe hebben jullie het werken met het protocol ervaren. En zij gaven aan dat ze eindelijk meer handvaten hadden om het kindinterview vorm te geven. Maar daarbij moet gezegd worden dat feedbacksessies enorm belangrijk zijn om te voorkomen dat deze interviewers anders terugvallen in hun oude gewoontes. En dit is ook iets wat we hebben gezien in eerder onderzoek. Nou, we kunnen een aantal concrete aanbevelingen doen vanuit deze studie, waarvan ik er nu eentje zal bespreken, toegespitst op de casus van Lisa. Want als Lisa met deze verontrustende onthullingen eigenlijk thuiskomt, dan zou in plaats van dat Veilig Thuis de politie contacteert en daar een hele lange wachttijd ontstaat, taken dubbel moeten worden gedaan, zou het een optie kunnen zijn dat de politie samen met Veilig Thuis dit interview vormgeeft. Op deze manier kan er sneller een interview gepland worden. De politie kan ook vanuit de strafrechtelijke kant een interview vormgeven en Veilig Thuis meer vanuit het zicht op veiligheid. Dus ze kunnen in die zin ook echt wel hun krachten bundelen. We weten ook dat het voor de betrouwbaarheid van de verklaring van Lisa ook veel voordeliger is, omdat er sneller een interview gepland kan worden. En bovendien kan er op deze manier ook sneller hulp verleend worden en hoeft dus niet worden afgewacht tot er een strafrechtelijk onderzoek plaatsvindt. En daarnaast weten we op deze manier ook of Lisa veilig terug naar huis kan. En sturen we haar niet zomaar terug naar huis, terwijl we niet weten wat er aan de hand is, kunnen professionals veiligheidsafspraken maken. En wordt er gewoon veel sneller duidelijk wat er eigenlijk aan de hand is. En op deze manier kom ik eigenlijk aan het einde van mijn presentatie en wil ik jullie hartelijk danken voor jullie aandacht en geef ik graag het woord terug aan de prorector.
Thank you very much for your clear presentation. The opposition will now be opened by the chairman of the reading committee, Professor Muris. Professor of Developmental Psychopathology at this university.
Okay, thank you. So I really enjoyed reading your thesis. I think it's very important that this type of research is done in the field, in an organization. And I also see in your thesis that you make a lot of recommendations for the field, and I think it's really important to do research and then come up with recommendations, which of course then need to be implemented. That is the second step, and that is really important. So I want to give you compliments about this nice research, and also to the promotion team. I have a number of questions, and these are concerned with Chapter 5. And in Chapter 5, I'm not sure what happened. This is a published study. The first thing that struck me was the title was changed. Why did you change that? But the more content-wise question about this chapter is, I want you to take a step back. You come up with a number of recommendations on the basis of this study. The study is about 6 municipalities that you interviewed. Well, you interviewed people that worked there. I wondered about the people that you interviewed. Who were these people? Because I work also 1 day per week in a clinical practice, Use Maastricht. Let's put it this way, I want to put it nice. There are good people working at the municipalities, and there are also bad people working at the municipalities. So people that, for example, what I encountered is, we had a girl with anorexia nervosa. I had a meeting with one of the people of the municipality, and she told me, well, maybe, why doesn't she eat more? That was her advice. She kind of neglected the problem. She didn't understand what it is. So we have to deal with this. Yeah, well, there are also good people, so they know more about the content, etc. What I also noticed with the municipality is that it is a transition job. So there is a lot of change in people that I work with. Then you have one counselor, another person comes in 3 weeks later, and so you always have to deal with different people. And it's also important when, we think it's important for the children and the families to get the help, and get the appropriate help, but there is also a financial aspect to this. So at the end of the year, for example, they want to delay maybe the treatment because the money is no longer available. So all these kinds of things are present in the field. And in this chapter, you kind of give the municipalities an important position for the indication of the care, of the indication of the treatment that the children and their families need. And so I want you to take a step back. If you would have the power in the Netherlands to rearrange this system, what would it be like? How would you make sure that children that are abused in their families, and how would you then choose a more procedure that would make sure that these children are actually helped? Is that a clear question?
Yeah. Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliments and these questions, which relate to Chapter 5. I was not sure about the first question about changing the title, because I couldn't remember that we did so. We did translate it, of course, to English, and then it got a bit of a different angle, but I think the main message remained more or less the same. But in terms of your other questions, the first one relating to who are the professionals that we interviewed in this study, which were all behavioral scientists working at these municipalities, and I agree that, of course, there are better professionals working at these at these organizations and professionals that have somewhat less knowledge about the topic. However, I think these are behavioral scientists, and I know that of the 6 municipalities, they often have only 1 or 2 of these behavioral scientists, and these are people who often have also more of a leading position in the team, so they are ought to know what the field is about, what child abuse is about, how can they treat it, and so forth, because they also guide a team of social workers, the same as at Safe Home the behavioral scientists do. So I think that of all the people that we could have interviewed, those were our best option, because we hope that they have the right knowledge to do the job, so to speak. Because they also have a background, of course, in psychology or in pedagogic studies or something like that. They are academically educated. I do agree that there are a lot of complex aspects to this field, even like you mentioned, the financial cost, but also that it's more of a transition job where a lot of people change jobs, and I think that the decentralization of the whole youth care system in 2015 made it even worse in that regard. So that's that. And relating to your second question about which procedure that I would recommend if I were to say something about this, well, in an ideal situation, I think that if you have a child protective system that is really evidence-based, that uses the right methods to investigate these cases and also formulate an advice for treatment or care, that they should be leading. So they formulate an advice. This is also one of the main tasks of Safe Home. We already do this. We write an advice. We should say these are the risk factors and these should be targeted in treatment, and they can easily look what is available in that area in regards to the evidence-based methods that are being deployed there. Then those can be implemented in the family and should be monitored in the period that is to come. And they can do that together, for example, with a case manager from the municipalities. And then also this case manager can, together with the Safe Home professionals, evaluate if the treatment is doing its job, is effective. I don't think that the way it is organized at this moment, that the municipalities receive the case of Safe Home and then, I describe in also the chapter 5, that they then talk to the family and say, hey, what do you want for treatment? Let's implement that. I think that we should get rid of that way of work. And that, maybe the work process, which I just discussed, that would be an alternative. Because it also, at this moment, it's more of a duplication, that the municipalities receive this case of Safe Home and they do it all over again. I don't see why, when there just has been a very, throughout investigation into the child abuse. So that would be an alternative if they use the right methods to formulate this advice.
Yeah, but don't do the last thing. Just keep with your first thing. Safe Home should do the job, and then you hand it over and they look for parties that can do the job.
Yes.
So I totally agree with you, and thank you also for this great answer. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Nederkoorn, Professor of Cognitive Psychology of Eating.
Dear candidate, I also read your thesis with much interest. I'm working in a different research field, and for me this thesis offered a view into an unknown world, and I have to say a sad world. You had important questions and you studied it systematically with great care and precision, and you have, as my colleague already told, very important recommendations. I want to congratulate you and extend this to your supervising team. but I also have a question. It's about chapter 4. In chapter 4, you describe that of each report of child abuse, a first safety assessment is made, and when an investigation is started, a more thorough safety assessment should be made. This is now mainly done without a protocol that describes how this safety assessment should be done. But there are structured risk assessments available, like the CARE-NL, in which 18 risk factors are assessed. And in this chapter, you looked retrospectively in the risk assessment that were made without the protocol, if these 18 factors were assessed and described. That was not the case, and you found that especially the parental factors were missing, and you conclude that this is a problem, and that structured protocols, like the CARE, should be used. I wondered a bit about this, because I thought, when I read it, it looks very logical, but are we sure? So do we know for sure that the factors that were missed were really very relevant, and that the assessors made wrong risk assessments or safety assessment? Or could it be that they were experts and that maybe they kind of noticed the most important risk factors and actually they did a nice job? So how can we be sure that the older assessments, or maybe still the new assessments without these protocols, are really doing a bad job, and perhaps the risk factors that are ignored, maybe they are not so important? So how can you be sure that this is really a problem? That's my first question.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliment and this question. Well, the answer to this is quite simple, because I think that the literature on this part, the risk factors that pose a great risk for future child maltreatment, are very well investigated, and one of the main, the most important risk factors are the parental risk factors, such as substance abuse with one of the parents. And when looking at these case files at Safe Home, we saw that these risk factors, these parental risk factors, were not often mentioned. So that's, I think, very important that, to start with that we know from literature that these risk factors are very important. But even, let me put it like this, it could be the case that these professionals looked at these risk factors and they thought, oh, well, they're not absent, they're not present at this moment, so I just don't mention them in the case file. That could be an option. But then I think that even though they were not present, that should be mentioned as well, because this social worker or behavioral scientist or whoever does this risk assessment will move on, disappear, this case file will remain there, and the next person comes and he or she doesn't know anything about the family and has no information on it. Yeah.
I understand what you say, and I also understand that the literature says these factors were important. However, it would also be nice, or maybe, in my opinion, if you would have kind of an objective measure, if you look retrospectively, if in some case the wrong assessment was made. And that is, of course, very difficult, because you do something and you cannot do something twice, or you don't have a control group in this case. But I thought maybe you could, is it possible to look, for instance, at quality of life of the child and compare that maybe after a year in cases in which protocol was used and in cases in which no protocol was used? Kind of the idea that if you have a wrong risk assessment, quality of life of the child would be lower.
Thank you for the question. First, let me add by saying that I think that the thing of structured risk assessment can be seen separately. For example, the quality of life of a child. I think those are two different things.
Yeah, but one should, in the end, lead to the other, right? There are many steps in between, but...
Yeah, but does quality of life, for example, mean that no child maltreatment has occurred? So that those are all very complex things that come together, and the objective of the risk assessment is really to estimate the future risk of child maltreatment and not to enhance the quality of life of a child, although very important, I agree with that. But I think that that the structured risk assessment at this moment is just absent, and that is the problem. And that is the problem all over again, also from previous research conducted in the Netherlands, that there is no standard risk assessment tool. There's no way of evidence-based work in that regard, and then of course there might be professionals that are doing a great job, yes, and maybe there are children that where the quality of life has improved, yes, but I don't think that is the problem at the moment. I think the problem is that these professionals just use whatever they think is necessary, the unstructured clinical judgment, and they don't use any evidence-based methods. And so I think that is the problem.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. I give the word back.
Okay, the opposition will now be preceded by Professor Jelicic, Professor of Neuropsychology and Law at this university.
Thank you, Mr. Prorector. Dear candidate, I had limited time to read your thesis, but I think it's an important work with a lot of societal value. So my congratulations. So I would like to congratulate you, of course, in the first place, but also your promotion team. I also want to congratulate them, of course. So my question is about chapter 2, and you already talked a bit about it during your the opening speech that you gave in Dutch. So chapter 2 is about beliefs that or opinions that these people working at safe, what is it?
Safe
Child
home.
Safe Home, Child Protection Services, the beliefs that people have about memory and also about interviewing techniques. And one of the things that you found was that people working the Child Protection Services, people working at that institution, they have, some of their beliefs are not that bad, so they know that memory can be influenced by suggestions, but they also think that repression is possible. And that doesn't surprise me at all, because if you look at other surveys that have been done with among clinical psychologists or psychotherapists or police officers, they all think that repression is possible. And there's still people in the scientific community. There are still people who think, well-respected people who think that repression is possible. Now, with regard to people who work for child protection services, why is that an important issue? What the heck? Why, if they think that repression is possible, why would that be an issue? Why would that undermine their professional abilities? They should know how to interview children. They should know that suggestion, of course, is totally wrong if you interview children. But why bother? Why, if they have the idea that repression is possible, why would that be important to them? So that's my question.
Okay. Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliment and question. First of all, I think that believing in repression indicates some lack of knowledge in this area, because we see that, of course, these professionals not only have a lack of knowledge on this particular statement referring to repression, but also to some other statements, how memory works and how they should interview children. But I do believe that it is important that they know, what repression is about, and why it is important that they have the right knowledge in this regard. Is that it could pose potential dangers, hazards in their investigation. For example, if you have a case where a child, for example, had therapy and then never had any recollection about abuse, and then during this therapy sessions he or she comes up with all these memories of abuse, and this was suggested during therapy, then I think that if you believe in repression, then and you conduct this investigation, you might think that this is a very strong indicator that abuse might have happened. Well, if you are more critical regarding this topic, you might say, I don't know what's going on, let's dive into this, and you will do a thorough collateral investigation with informants and so forth. So that might bias someone.
Yeah, but the thing is, of course, that if you talk about repression, there's also something else which you see a lot in children who have been abused, that they are not willing to talk about what they have been going through. So I've been an expert witness in a couple of those cases, and I've seen one case in which a girl was really silent about what happened. Well, there was video evidence that she was abused, and the reason was that she wanted to protect the perpetrator. So in that sense, repression or not willing to talk about what happened to you is not that different.
I don't know. I think there is. I mean, we know, of course, that children often do not disclose their abuse, that they keep it silent for years and years, and that there are several reasons for that, and that these disclosure patterns are quite complex. I think that in this specific case that you mentioned, I don't know the age of the child, of course, but you can conduct an interview with a child and ask about the memories that he or she had and the reasons why she kept silent during this whole period, and that will give you some more information, I think, on this particular aspect.
Okay, I'm happy with the answer. Okay, and now give the word back to the Prorector. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. The opposition will now be continued online by Dr. Laroy, Senior Research Fellow, Department of Psychological Medicine, University of Otago, New Zealand.
Kia ora from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Congratulations on writing such a good thesis. As you know, it's a topic that is very close to my heart. It was very well organized, very well presented, and the quality of writing was of a very, very high standard. So that made it even more interesting to read. Congratulations also on having your studies already published. I think that's a tremendous achievement. So that's really good for your confidence to know that. I also liked during your thesis that your research questions were very focused and able to be answered with the most rudimentary and simple analyses, and that made it really easy to follow, and it showed me that you had a really clear focus of what it was in terms of the very important questions you were attempting to answer in your thesis. I have a lot of questions that I could ask, but I have 7.5 minutes, so the quicker you answer them, the more I can ask. My first question is about chapter 3. Studies like this have already been conducted, and I'm sure you've read plenty of them where people have conducted some training, looked at the NICHD protocol, and wanted to see if it improves the quality of forensic interviewing. How does this study add to what we already know? And why is it important to conduct a study like this in the Netherlands?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliment and question, which is regarding chapter 3, the implementation of the NICHD protocol. And why is this important and how does this add, of course, to the large amount of studies that already have been done. I think, first, it was the first time that the NSCHD protocol was brought to the Netherlands. So it's quite new, of course, for our country in that sense. But a second thing, I think, is that a lot of the studies that already have been conducted have more within subjects design. So they train a group of, for example, police officers, and they then follow them and see how their interview skills have improved. While we have, of course, compared it to the current practice and also the practice in specifically safe home, child protective services, and how these different two methods can be compared, and also with the Science of Safety 3 Houses method. So I think that was also quite new. And I think it adds a lot, of course, to the field of the Dutch child protective services. So in that regard, I think that is the added value here in Chapter 3.
That's a great answer. It's very important to conduct this research in the very jurisdictions that you're trying to create change in. Very, very important research to conduct in the Netherlands, and I know that there are only a few studies of that type so far, and I hope more are conducted. Your answer leads to my second question. You talked about the within subject design there of most previous studies, which I tend to like. It's what I would call a quasi-experimental type design. My question is around the ethics of what you did, and just to seek your views on the design you chose. So correct me if I'm wrong, it looks like you're using real cases and they've been randomly assigned to either control condition or the NICHD protocol condition. How does that sit ethically, or what were the ethical discussions you had about taking a child that may very well have been abused and then randomly assigning them to an interview condition that may be what you predict to be substandard? Were there any ethical concerns about that?
Okay, thank you for that question. So if I understand correctly, your question relates to the ethical considerations about placing a child in the NICHD condition or the control condition. Of course, that was discussed, and I think that is also something that comes up in a lot of these experimental studies in the field, where you try to implement a new, better way of working. And I think the only option in that regard is to really make sure that the way of randomizing is done properly, and that even, of course, parents didn't know where they knew they were participating in this research and that we were trying to improve our practice, but they didn't know where their child was being placed. And we, of course, didn't know until the moment that we randomized the case in one of the two conditions, which we also did by using the software, where it was really randomly put in one of the two conditions, and then we coupled an interviewer of that condition to the case. So I don't think that there is really much to say to that anymore than that it was just random being done. And of course, we know that the children in the NSCHD condition have somewhat more, the better condition, because it is an evidence-based method. But I think it's also important to keep in mind the future goal in that, and that was initially, at least at this safe home, that eventually we would implement the NICHD protocol and use it for all the cases. So, I hope that gives a bit of a clarification.
That's a good answer. I think there are a lot of ethical issues doing research in this area, and when we come close to those ethical boundaries, we need to make sure there are very big gains that we can make, and the research that you've conducted does promise to be able to make substantial improvements moving forward. So it is, although ethically risky, and lots of discussions would have had to have been taking place about that, you do need, as you said, to take into consideration the potential gains and the bigger picture moving forward. If I have time for another question, I noticed that you didn't find any statistically significant differences between the directives and option posing questions in your study. That's a different finding compared to some of the other studies I've read about the NICHD protocol, where you would see decreases in the number of directives and option posing questions that are used because the information has already been put forward in response to the option posing questions. Why do you think in your study you didn't see a reduction in those type of questions, and you only saw the increase in the option posing question?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, I thought about that a lot after the analysis, why that could have been, and when also comparing it to earlier studies. And I think it's just, we know that, of course, the improvements in the interview skills are the most difficult concerning the questions that these interviewers ask, because they are the most cognitive demanding tasks that they have to do, because they have to think about the next question, but also keep in mind what the child has told them. And then, yeah, this makes it a very complex and cognitive demanding task. I do think that it can be that because we trained these professionals 3 days, and then immediately after that we started data collection, so they didn't have much time to practice really with the protocol. That's one reason why that could have been absent. Afterwards, I thought maybe we could have even stated that aspect even more of the NICH protocol in the training. I don't know how afterwards I thought maybe we should have been more focused also at the potential hazards of the directive questions and the option posing questions. But I'm not sure about that answer. I think it's more the first thing, that it's cognitive demanding, and that also these interviewers immediately started with their practice, with their data collection, and therefore didn't have much time to really let go of these old interview habits. And it would be interesting to see how much they will evolve, I think, as regarding those two types of question, and if it gets better with more practice. So that would be a good thing to look at in the future, maybe.
Yeah, that was my hunch as well. I think that's a really good answer. Thanks. If I have time for one last question, it just relates to something that you've touched on in several parts of your thesis, but it was one of the findings from chapter 2 in the survey, where you were asking interviewers about directive questions. During a child forensic interview, directive questions should only be used when open questions have been exhausted. I just want to imagine that you're an interview trainer, and I'm in your class, and you say that to me. I might put my hand up and say, well, actually, there are some really, really good directive and option posing questions that that can be used to clarify information that has been provided by a child in response to an open prompt. Why should they not be asked?
Okay.
Can you keep it short please.
Yes, I've tried to answer.
sorry.
Well, I think that if the option is there, I would always go for acute invitation. So first try to get the answer by acute invitation if invitations are no longer an option because the child doesn't respond anymore. And then secondly, I agree that there are good directive and option posing questions, but we know that from studies that they, if we compare it to more the invitations and acute invitations, that they lead to, of course, answers with more errors as regard to the invitations and acute invitations. So therefore, I would always try to stay away from those if it's possible.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Gijssen, scientific researcher at Police Academy of the Netherlands.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Prorector. Dear candidate, first I want to compliment you and your supervisors, of course, on your thesis. I was especially impressed that you addressed some significant omissions and flaws in Safe Home's approach of child abuse investigations. And at the same time, you've been able to give some clear and practical evidence-based guidelines to improve these investigations, so very impressive. My questions are about current interview practices and future improvements. As you know, I'm trying to conduct research on police interrogations at the Police Academy. And I deliberately call it interrogations, by the way, and not interviews, because the Dutch police have not been able to incorporate about tens of years of scientific research and police practices on investigative interviewing in their interviewing methods in the Netherlands. When I was reading your dissertation, it appeared to me that this, well, at least to some extent, also might apply to Safe Home regarding interviewing methods. So in the introduction of your dissertation, you mentioned the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which states all actions concerning children, whether undertaken by public or private social welfare institutions, courts or law, administrative authorities or legislative bodies, the best interest of the child shall be primary consideration. And I think that is fundamental in regard how to Safe Home must execute their authorities. However, since I'm a police officer, I also have some legal background, and I looked up Dutch law, the Wet Maatschappelijke Ondersteuning, or the Societal Support Act, which is partly on the organization, tasks, and authorities of Safe Home. And I read in Chapter 4, Paragraph 2 of this Act, Article 4.1.4.2.1 states that Safe Home must ensure that the execution of their duties is of good quality, and that it must provide itself of quantitatively and qualitatively good personnel and equipment in order to execute their tasks properly. That is almost a summary of this article. So, my first question for you is this. The NICHD protocol was developed in the 90s of the past century and is used in an increasing numbers of countries around the world. And because it is an evidence-based method for interviewing, it's simply the most effective way for interviewing not only children, but and your research showed that the present Safe Home interviewing methods are less effective than the NICHD protocol. Hence, my question is, do you agree with me that current Safe Home child interviewing practices are not only not in line with the UN Convention, but moreover, it could be argued that these interviewing methods are actually in violation with the Dutch Societal Support Act because of its poor quality? And what are your thoughts on this? And my second question, small question, in Chapter 6, you stressed the importance of so-called learning organizations. And I guess large and bureaucratic organizations such as Safe Home and the police are pretty comparable in many ways. And in the past years, I've encountered much resistance and hostility about reforming current police interrogation practices into modern investigative interviewing within the police and police academy. So I am very curious about your thoughts about why Safe Home has not been able to incorporate the NICHD protocols within their internal guidelines during the past years. How much effort and time will it take to change Safe Home child interviewing methods? What do you think is key for change?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliment and these questions. If I understand correctly, your first question is related also to the Support Act, and if the current way that Safe Home interviews children, but also I think it's more broader. I think it's more also related to the way that they work in general concerning these evidence-based methods, and if it's not a violation of this Support Act and also the Convention of the Rights of the Child as posed by the United Nations. And I think at the moment that can be said. Sometimes I think it's a bit of a radical quote to post like that. It sounds very harsh, but I think it is true at this moment. I think that in order to really adhere to these conventions and these guidelines that are there, that have been developed to protect children, to give them a voice, that we should really also act towards these guidelines, and that means that children are interviewed by evidence-based methods, that are given a voice in every investigation. So I can't say any more than I just agree with you that it is a violation, and I hope it will change soon. Which brings me to your second question. If Safe Home is in that regard more of a learning organization, also when you compare it to the police, and I have read also your work at the police and your research into the interrogation procedures over there. I do think that at this moment, because of the pilot that we've conducted at Safe Home in South Limburg, this has spread throughout the country, and that more and more professionals have come to us, wanted to be trained in the NSHD protocol, and because it was so successful, but also for professionals who really saw the benefits of it and saw that children spoke more during their investigations, that they themselves found more having these tools during their interviews, that it spread it. And I think that's a good first step in improving this practice. And the second step would be that the top players of the organization also see this, and that they stand behind this way of working, and more the evidence-based way of working, and that they are also willing to put in the time and effort and also the money it takes to make this a success and also make this sustainable inside Safe Home. But it wasn't, of course, this is now at the end, so the successful part of it. But of course, it takes a lot of commitment from different people to get the message right and to make this change happening.
Right, okay, thank you so much. Mr. Prorector.
Thank you very much. The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Rijmakers, lecturer in forensic psychology at this university.
Thank you, Mr. Prorector. I would also like to take some time to congratulate you with your beautiful dissertation. Specifically, I'd like to convey my compliments for your very clear writing style. With this application-oriented dissertation, you offer a very important contribution to the field, and hereby you also nicely respond to the valorization demands that the university believes so important in recent years, again underscoring the importance of knowledge exchange. As you might know, over the past 10 years, I've worked as an expert witness analyzing cases of alleged childhood sexual abuse. And it was already touched upon by my colleague, Professor Helicic, but one of the things that I've noted was the great variety and level of disclosures of these alleged victims. That is, whereas some children talk very freely about things that they have experienced, others show high reluctance to disclose. And of course, this obviously poses a rather big challenge to interviewers, which brings me to my first question. I am very curious about your recommendations with respect to applying the NICHD protocol specifically to these types of cases. Moreover, I'd like you to elaborate on general ways to overcome reluctance to disclose.
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your compliments and this question relating to disclosure patterns of children and also overcoming reluctance. Well, I think that there is already a lot of studies that have been done regarding reluctance. We, of course, know that girls are more intended to disclose than boys. The younger the child is, the less he or she is to disclose. We also know that some factors are quite important, the relation to the perpetrator, for example. If the child may or may not have been abused in a family, then that might be if the relation to the perpetrator is someone in the family, then that also often doesn't lead to a disclosure. And so there are many factors that already have been investigated. And it would, of course, be a very good thing if professionals that work on these cases know of this scientific knowledge on this regard. So I think that's one thing that could be beneficial in these cases. The second thing is that overcoming this reluctance can, of course, only be done by using a good interview method. And the NICHD protocol, there have been numerous studies where reluctant children and very young children as well have been disclosing their abuse by means of the protocol. And the newest version of the protocol, the NICHD protocol revised, specifically is developed for these cases. And there are already investigations done on this regard as well by Herskowicz and colleagues who really try to overcome this reluctance. And then you also see that by building more an established report building, more elaborately report building, we know that children are then more at ease, that they are more inclined to disclose. So that could also be an option. I think that I have to drink a bit. Sorry. That with the revised protocol, that children, I think, will be more at ease maybe, and also more inclined to disclose this information. And also, I think the relationship to the interviewer in general, that could also be beneficial in future studies, to be evaluated more, to research more, because we know that certain characteristics of interviewer, an open attitude, warm, kindness, so to speak, are also important and can be a contributing factor for children to disclose what might have happened to them. So I think, that if you take all these things together, summarizing, so more the scientific background, the factors that are important, and also the yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say, and then working according to the NICHD protocol revised may be beneficial in that regard. Yeah.
Thank you for your answer.
Brenda Ahrens, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
Thank you.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes. In the meantime, let's take a closer look at Maastricht University's renowned teaching method, problem-based learning. Once the prorector reconvenes the session, we'll tune in and continue the live stream.
Problem-based learning, or PBL. What does that mean exactly? 3 of my fellow students and I will show you around. Every week, we analyze a different case or issue together. We discuss the case and everyone can contribute different perspectives to the group discussion. If we get stuck, our tutor helps us out and suggests what we could do next. I prefer going to the library to prepare. Here, I can focus and I have quick access to books or journals that help me understand the case. Today, I can also train my stitching skills in the Skills Lab, where you can immediately put into practice what you've learned. After a day like this, I like going to the gym to clear my head and get ready for the next day.
At UM, you meet people from all around the world. Hello guys. Some of them are doing their exchange semester here, and they often say that PBL helps them learn and retain things very easily. I can understand why. It's a very active way of learning because you have to bring your own perspective to real-life cases. You have a lot of freedom to manage your time, your studies, your hobbies, and your work. Of course, that also means a lot of responsibility. Right now, for example, I'm arranging my exchange semester in Madrid. How cool is that? In this group session, we're the managers who have to allocate the resources of a real company. This is how we put into practice what we learned this morning. Studying here means being proactive and learning to plan well. Prioritizing and performing well under stress are great skills that help you develop as a person. But now, it's time to grab a coffee at the Student Service Center.
Right now, we're at the Brightlands Camelot campus. Here we can apply knowledge from lectures and tutorials in a practical setting. This helps us understand what we have learned and further develop our lab skills. Today, we're determining the amounts of cholesterol in various products. What I really like is the project periods at the end of each semester, where we complete a full research project. That includes planning, collecting data, analyzing, and presenting the findings. That way we learn how research works and we're able to see what it's like to be a real scientist. After practicals, I have to write a lab report that also helps me process everything I have learned today. UM has a lot of learning spaces where you can work on your own or with other students. This evening, I'm meeting my friends for a movie night organised by the MSP Study Association.
If you study law, you have to read quite a lot. Not all information is relevant, so you learn how to easily find the information you need to solve your case. In the afternoon, I have to give a presentation, so I like to practice it with a fellow student. Later today, a lawyer is giving a lecture. This will help us better understand the case we're working on. Speaking in front of a group is quite exciting the first time round, but you get used to it quickly. And having to present helps you also to adopt knowledge better. What I like the most is that we sometimes get to enter a plea in front of a real judge. These moot courts are really exciting. Now it's time for drinks with friends. Studying is important, but so is relaxing once in a while.
Brenda Ahrens, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor de Ruiter is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Please, all rise. Belooft u dat u altijd volgens de beginselen van de wetenschappelijke integriteit te werk zult gaan? Eerlijk, zorgvuldig, transparant, onafhankelijk en verantwoordelijk.
Ja, dat beloof ik.
Krachtens de bevoegdheid ons door de wet toegekend, volgens het besluit van de commissie hier tegenwoordig, verklaar ik hierbij u, Brenda Irene Freddy Ahrens, tot dokter te bevorderen en u alle rechten te verlenen die daaraan volgens wet en gewoonte zijn verbonden. Ten bewijze hiervan overhandig ik u nu de bul door rector, secretaris en overige leden van de promotiecommissie ondertekend en met het grootzegel van de universiteit bevestigd.
Kijk eens. Ja.
Zeer geleerde dokter Ahrens, lieve Brenda, van harte gefeliciteerd met je doctoraat. Namens Henry en mijzelf als promotieteam. Zoals je in je dankwoord van je dissertatie beschrijft, is je promotietraject bij tijden een hobbelig pad geweest, waarbij je stuitte op onverwachte ondergrondse keien en soms ook beren op de weg. Maar daarover straks meer. Voor nu mag je vooral genieten van deze academische mijlpaal, die je met groot doorzettingsvermogen en steun vanuit je omgeving hebt bereikt. Ik richt deze felicitaties dan ook graag aan je partner, Martijn, je zus, je ouders en je vrienden. We kennen elkaar al een hele lange tijd. Om precies te zijn, sinds einde 2012. Dat is nu dus precies 10 jaar geleden. Toen schreef je onder mijn supervisie je bachelorthese. Je was op zoek naar een antwoord op de vraag of seksueel misbruikt zijn in de kindertijd een risicofactor is om zelf als volwassene pleger van seksueel kindermisbruik te worden. Ik herinner me uit die tijd je enthousiasme en gedrevenheid. En je schreef een hele mooie these met als titel The Cycle of Sexual Abuse. A systematic review concerning the findings and implications of the sexually abused sexual abuser hypothesis. Dat was in februari 2013. Daarna volgde je de 2-jarige Master Forensic Psychology, ook aan onze universiteit. Je deed in dat 2e jaar van die opleiding een stage bij de forensische afdeling Radix van Mondriaan in Heerlen. Maar je was ervan overtuigd dat je academische opleiding hiermee nog niet voltooid was. Jij wilde promoveren. Zo solliciteerde je toen naar een double degree aan de Universiteit van Sydney en de UM. En je wilde dat bekostigen met een International Postgraduate Research Scholarship. Die plannen gingen niet in vervulling. Maar er kwam iets anders op je pad. Uiteindelijk ging je werken bij Veilig Thuis Zuid-Limburg. Eerst als onderzoeker, maar al snel als gedragswetenschapper een iets meer verantwoordelijke baan. Jouw kritische geest zag al snel vele verbetermogelijkheden bij Veilig Thuis. En je nodigde mij uit om een training in gestructureerde risicotaxatie bij kindermishandeling te geven. En je merkte echter al snel dat één enkele training nog geen zomer bracht in een organisatie die vooral afgerekend wordt op doorlooptijden en andere procesparameters in plaats van op de kwaliteit van het werk dat daar verricht wordt. Nadat Henry en ik in de zomer van 2018 door Dr. David Laroy, we're talking about you, David, we were trained by David in the summer of 2016 in the NICHD interview protocol. And then we got the idea, toen kregen we het idee voor een gezamenlijk onderzoeksproject. En dit gaf jou nog steeds sprangende wens om te promoveren weer enig momentum. We verwierven een subsidie van ZonMW in het kader van het programma Verbetering Feitenonderzoek Kindermishandeling. Dat was een goed idee, dat programma. En jouw onderzoekstijd kon daaruit deels betaald worden en VT Zuid-Limburg vulde dat aan. En zo startten wij dus met het opleiden van een groep medewerkers van VT Zuid-Limburg in het NICHD-protocol. En ook Veilig Thuis West-Brabant deed mee met enkele medewerkers. Helaas ging die partnerorganisatie al heel snel het bijltje erbij neergooien. En dat kwam vooral vanwege zwak management. Onderzoek in de dagelijkse praktijk is niet voor watjes, mensen. Dat is wel weer opnieuw gebleken. Wetenschappelijk onderzoek heeft helaas maar weinig prioriteit bij uitvoeringsorganisaties zoals VT. Terwijl de GGD Zuid-Limburg toch eigenlijk geacademiseerd is. Jij moest dealen met allerlei zaken die jouw onderzoek belemmerd hebben, zoals een groot personeelsverloop, medewerkers die wij getraind hadden, die vervolgens door hun manager binnen een jaar werden overgeplaatst naar een andere rol in de organisatie. Met uitval van belangrijke collega's door ziekte. En last but not least, door steeds wisselende managers. Dit alles bij elkaar leidde tot vertraging van het project. En soms ook helaas tot grote frustratie bij jou. Dit waren die spreekwoordelijke keien op jouw promotiepad. Ik weet niet of je het nog weet, maar als motto voor je bachelorthese koos je een citaat van Sir Winston Churchill. If you're going through hell, keep going. Ik weet natuurlijk niet waarom je dat citaat toen gebruikte, maar het zou ook gepast hebben bij je dissertatie. Ik zou het ook nog even hebben over de beren op de weg. Beren op de weg zijn natuurlijk dingen die iemand zich voorstelt in de verbeelding, maar die meestal niet zoveel te maken hebben met de werkelijkheid. Jij bent tijdens je promotietraject een tijdje uit de running geweest vanwege stressgerelateerde klachten. En dat overkomt de beste. Daarna leek het soms alsof je enthousiasme voor onderzoek wel eens een beetje verminderd was. Alsof je als het ware bang was om opnieuw uit te vallen. Ik zou willen zeggen, Brenda, sla je vleugels uit. Angst is een slechte raadgever en geef die beren vooral niet te veel aandacht. Jouw kennis en kunde is hard nodig om de zorg voor mishandelde kinderen te verbeteren in Nederland. En met je geweldige verdediging vandaag heb je dat alleen maar nog een keer heel erg duidelijk gemaakt aan iedereen. Het feit dat een gerenommeerd tv-programma als Nieuwsuur aandacht besteedt aan jouw promotieonderzoek, dat zegt genoeg. Allemaal kijken, hè, vanavond. Henry en ik hopen van harte dat jouw nieuwe functie bij de Open Universiteit mogelijkheden biedt om ook in de toekomst onderzoek samen te blijven doen. Brenda, ik hoop dat je vandaag vooral heel erg geniet van de verworven eer en jezelf een grote schouderklop geeft. Maybe you went through hell, but you kept on going.
Dr. Eerens, namens de Universiteit Maastricht feliciteren wij u met uw behaalde titel. Rest mij nog wat procedurele mededelingen. Er worden zometeen een paar foto's gemaakt van de kandidaat met de buitenlandse opponent op de achtergrond of de voorgrond. In die tijd kunt u alvast naar de refter, naar de receptieruimte zich begeven. En daarna wordt nog een foto op de trap gemaakt, als ik het goed heb begrepen. En daarna kan de receptie beginnen. En hiermee sluit ik deze zitting.